The afternoon heat on the island felt like it came from two suns, one hanging low over the Pacific, the other burning up from the white coral underfoot. On October 20th, 1944, as American forces pressed deeper into the central Philippines during the opening hours of the invasion of Battle of Leyte, Captain Richard Mallory of the 32nd Infantry Regiment stood knee-deep in a hastily dug foxhole along the edge of a coconut grove overlooking a narrow coastal road. He was 36 years old, a veteran of New Guinea's steaming jungles, and he knew the sound of engines that did not belong to trucks. The first rumble came faintly through the palms. Not the uneven grind of supply vehicles. Not the stutter of artillery tractors. This was smoother, heavier, deliberate. Mallory raised his field glasses and focused on the bend in the road where it disappeared into a curtain of green. A moment later, the fronds trembled. Then the lead tank appeared. It was a Japanese Type 97 medium tank, its turret low and rounded, its long 57mm gun pointing forward like a finger aimed at the American line. Behind it came more shapes, 3, 4, then 6 in all, spreading slightly as they cleared the tree line. Infantry clung to the hulls and rear decks, rifles slung across their backs, boots wedged into handholds welded onto steel plates barely thick enough to stop rifle rounds. Mallory felt no surge of panic. Only calculation. His battalion had landed that morning under intermittent mortar fire, pushing inland faster than intelligence officers had predicted. The Japanese had not attempted a large beach counterattack. Instead, they had withdrawn toward prepared positions, waiting. And now, somewhere beyond that bend in the road, a local commander had decided to strike before the Americans could entrench. Mallory had expected it. In the hours after landing, he had ordered his men to ignore exhaustion and dig, not shallow scrapes, but proper fighting positions with overhead cover and clear lanes of fire. He had placed his 57mm anti-tank guns at angles rather than directly facing the road, ensuring that any vehicle advancing would expose its flanks. 2 platoons were positioned in staggered depth along the grove's edge, their bazooka teams concealed behind fallen trunks. Further back, partially masked by a slight rise in terrain, waited 3 M4 Sherman tanks from the 44th Tank Battalion, engines idling softly. The Shermans looked bulky and almost awkward compared to the Japanese machines now emerging onto the coastal plain. At 30 tons, with frontal armor exceeding 50mm and 75mm main guns capable of punching through enemy steel at 1,000 yards, they represented a different philosophy of war. They were not built to dash recklessly across open ground. They were built to survive long enough to fire again. The Japanese tanks advanced confidently, their engines roaring as they picked up speed. Dust plumed behind their tracks. The infantry riding them scanned the tree lines for movement, rifles ready, unaware that dozens of American eyes were already fixed on them. For nearly a minute, neither side fired. Mallory wanted them closer. The road ran straight for 600 yards before bending toward the grove. On either side stretched open fields broken only by irrigation ditches and low earthen berms. It was perfect ground for armor, if the defenders were unprepared. But Mallory's gunners had spent the afternoon measuring distances. A shattered cart at 400 yards. A leaning palm at 300. A burned hut at 250. Every landmark had been whispered into memory. At 450 yards, the lead Type 97 fired first. Its 57mm shell screamed overhead and detonated somewhere behind the grove, throwing up a geyser of dirt and palm leaves. The Americans did not reply. At 400 yards, a second Japanese tank fired, this time striking the edge of the grove and splintering wood into the air. Still, Mallory held his hand up. At 300 yards, he dropped it. The first American 57mm gun cracked like a whip. The armor-piercing round struck the second Japanese tank just below its turret ring. The thin side armor buckled inward, and a flash of orange burst from vision slits. The vehicle lurched, slowed, and rolled into a ditch trailing black smoke. Within seconds, the grove erupted. Bazookas whooshed from concealed pits, white trails streaking toward steel. One rocket slammed into the lead tank's frontal plate and exploded in a shower of sparks. The armor held, but the impact stunned the crew and forced the driver to veer. Another rocket hit lower, near the track assembly, snapping links and immobilizing the vehicle in the center of the road. Machine guns opened up, stitching the hulls and tearing into the infantry clinging to them. Men tumbled from the steel decks, some leaping into irrigation ditches, others cut down before their boots touched earth. The Japanese tanks reacted with disciplined speed. Turrets traversed. High-explosive shells crashed into the grove, collapsing a fighting position and killing 2 American riflemen instantly. One tank pushed off the road entirely, grinding through a rice paddy in an attempt to flank the grove from the right. That was when the Shermans moved. Their engines roared as they crested the slight rise behind Mallory's line and rolled forward into hull-down positions. The first Sherman fired at 600 yards. Its 75mm shell struck the flanking Japanese tank squarely on the turret. The explosion lifted the turret half an inch before it slammed back into place, flames pouring from hatches. The second Sherman fired almost simultaneously, its round punching clean through the side of another Type 97 attempting to pivot off the road. The Japanese return fire rattled against the Sherman's frontal armor with metallic clangs that meant nothing. For the Japanese crews, the illusion shattered in seconds. The speed that had carried them through earlier campaigns in China and Southeast Asia meant little here. The American guns outranged them. The American armor resisted them. And the grove that had looked like a thin line of infantry concealed a layered defense of steel and discipline. 2 Japanese tanks attempted to reverse, tracks grinding desperately as their drivers sought cover behind the bend in the road. But American gunners had already adjusted. Another 57mm round tore into the rear of one retreating vehicle, igniting fuel. A bazooka team sprinted forward under covering fire and launched a rocket into the engine compartment of the last operational tank still on the road. The entire engagement lasted less than 12 minutes. When the smoke drifted across the fields and settled among the palms, 6 Japanese tanks lay destroyed or abandoned along the coastal road. American medics moved carefully through the grove, dragging the wounded to safer ground. Engineers approached cautiously to ensure no damaged vehicle still concealed a living gunner. Mallory climbed from his foxhole and walked forward slowly, boots crunching on shattered wood and expended brass. He passed one of the disabled Type 97s, its thin armor peeled back like torn tin. Inside, the crew remained at their posts. He felt no triumph. He had seen this before, in different jungles, against different enemies. Machines built for speed, thrown against prepared defenses. Courage spent like ammunition. By nightfall, Japanese artillery began probing the American positions, shells landing sporadically across the grove and road. But no further armor emerged. The local commander had committed his reserve and lost it. From that moment forward, the battle in this sector would shift to something slower and far more brutal. Infantry fighting through villages, clearing bunkers, advancing yard by yard through mud and palm roots. In the weeks that followed, as the broader struggle for Leyte expanded into naval clashes in the surrounding seas and desperate air attacks against the invasion fleet, the small tank engagement on that coastal road would barely merit a paragraph in official reports. Yet to the men who had watched steel approach through the palms, it marked a turning point. They had learned something essential. Japanese armored doctrine had once relied on surprise, speed, and the assumption that defenders would lack the coordination to stop a determined charge. But by late 1944, American units had refined the art of defense. Anti-tank guns were landed early. Bazooka teams were integrated into rifle platoons. Sherman crews trained to fight not as independent units but as part of a web of overlapping fire. The result was not merely superior firepower. It was synchronization. The road where those 6 tanks burned would remain scarred long after the battle moved inland. Twisted hulls would sit in the tropical rain for months, metal slowly corroding under salt air. Local villagers would avoid the area, whispering about spirits. American engineers would eventually drag the wreckage aside to widen the supply route. But for a brief, violent stretch of afternoon, that road became a proving ground, not of bravery, which both sides possessed in abundance, but of adaptation. Captain Mallory would later write in a letter home that the most striking moment was not the explosion of the first tank or the roar of the Shermans. It was the silence just before he gave the order to fire. The stillness when both sides believed the next few seconds would decide everything. In that silence lived the truth of modern war, not chaos, but preparation. Not fury, but geometry. Lines of fire drawn carefully across maps and then tested in flame. By the time the Philippines campaign ground toward its costly conclusion, tank battles like the one on that coastal road would fade into the larger narrative of naval clashes and island sieges. But they revealed something fundamental. Steel alone did not win wars. Neither did speed. Victory belonged to the side that learned fastest, that turned hard lessons from earlier defeats into quiet adjustments in the hours before contact. And on that October afternoon in 1944, beneath the palms and the sinking Pacific sun, those adjustments burned brighter than any explosion.